Probably on the penis.
This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Spoiler warning for whatever is in the title of this episode.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible and all other major podcast apps.
Welcome to episode 81 of the Horror of Babylon, where we are discussing Stephen King's Salem's Lot. I am Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
And Hef's here too.
How y'all doing? Good to be here.
And thank you to our patrons, Abigail the First, Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, and
Logan,
the Full Metal Patron. And for Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit at the Morgantown Mall, Morgantown, West Virginia, the Mall at Robinson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and say hello to Father Ronahan, the preacher of Christmas. And as Hef's here, as we want him to do, we're going to ask him to give us a little update on the Horror of Babylon's plays, our Let's Plays that happen on YouTube. What are you playing now, Hef?
Right now we're diving into our roots, going back to Rusty Lake. That one got a lot of good feedback whenever I ran through it the first time, and I've got all three of them, so I'm going to run through the second one right now. Expect at least 6 episodes of that particular goodness, and I dare say it's somehow more fucked up than the first one, which I didn't think was possible.
As this is posting on Sunday, July 9th, there will already be 3 episodes of Rusty Lake Roots available on our YouTube page, so definitely check that out, especially if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast. Go on over to our YouTube page and hit a subscribe. We are about to hit 150, and I'm making a little mini goal for us to get 200 subscribers on YouTube by our 2nd anniversary.
Yeah, woo!
Woo.
So I'll work on promoting us harder.
I won't. That's your job, right? Yeah. All right, so trigger warnings. Abuse, both of children and of spouses. Loss of a child. Violence on children.
Doesn't Stephen King just have a rap sheet of trigger warnings?
Yeah. Those are the ones that stand out to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Our history with the Lot. Salem's Lot. Jerusalem's Lot. Old Father Pigpen's Vampire Garden. Daniel, what's your history with the Lot?
When I was God.
When were you God?
I mean, I used to go by Jesus, but then a bunch of pissed off dudes hung me to a tree like this.
Jesus was a demigod. Like Percy Jackson.
I want to see that death battle. Percy Jackson versus Jesus Christ.
Well, Percy has a sword, so he's going to win.
Derived from Perseus of the Jacksons.
Is he in the Jackson 5?
No, that was Michelangelo. He was an artist.
Oh, yeah, okay. No, he was a Ninja Turtle.
Oh.
Anyway, I might have been 10 years old. I watched the original miniseries on VHS. Like, my dad would rent me horror movies because he was very irresponsible, and it kept me occupied. God, I had to be younger than that if it was in his first place after my parents' divorce. God, I guess whenever the VHSs came out, I saw them and it fucked me up.
Way to go, Dad.
Years later, whenever I discovered I actually enjoy reading, I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go see how the books are. It was probably in college or very late high school, and I read Salem's Lot because I'm really into vampires. I've been trying to make tribal vampires work in modern for literal decades, and doesn't work. Read Salem's Lot, and then I ended up locking my windows for like a year. In summer, it's like 98 degrees. My mom's like, why don't you open your window? I'm like, no.
You haven't seen what I've seen.
I read it in 2021. It was the third Stephen King book I read after It and different seasons. But it was the one that really, like, kicked me off to being a Stephen King fan. And, like, I read Salem's Lot, and it was like, oh, my God. And then I read The Shining, and I was like, oh, my God. And then I read Dr. Sleep, and I just went and read, like, a ton of them. And at the time I first read it, I thought it was super scary, at, like, one of my all-time favorite novels. And I would have probably said it was my second favorite after It. It was just, like, basically a 10 out of 10. And then I reread it for this podcast, and I actually struggled a little bit with it. I didn't have as good a time with it on the second read, and I think there's a few reasons for that, which I'll get into more specifics as we go. But I think I had a hard time this time because I was comparing it to Dracula the whole time through, which hurt it a little bit for me. Still love it. I'm not going to be bashing Salem's Lot here. It's still an amazing book, but I don't think it's a 10 anymore. I think it's more like an 8.5. But we'll get into some of those specific criticisms as we get further in.
My history of Salem's Lot is, I've mentioned before on the podcast how I didn't watch scary things when I was younger because they scared the shit out of me. My mom frequently cited this book as the scariest book she'd ever read. Like, frequently would tell me that this is the most frightening book. And she would have read it at, like, the peak time, like, back then. So, like, back then, I mean, I could see this book being ridiculously frightening. Like, especially considering, like, a lot of the stuff that, like, especially back in the 70s, like, you still kind of had that, you know, TV was still kind of like TV intermittently. So, like, your imagination still took a lot of stuff and ran with it. So I could see this being a scary book back then. My biggest thing about this book is that this book was kind of my tepid dip into the realm of horror genre, because that was around the time you guys started doing this. And I came on for the Batman episode, and you all said we were doing Salem's Lot. And I'm like, well, this is really fun. I really like this. So, you know, maybe I should read something. And you all mentioned this one was the one you were looking at the time. So this was the first book I actually read for the podcast.
Over a year ago.
It got put off because of that fucking movie.
Which we'll talk about later.
Yeah. So in a way, this book is also very substantial to me because it did open me up to horror novels. This is the first horror novel I have ever read.
The vampire's a pure myth, superstition. I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
All right, so jumping into the background, this is a novel by Stephen King. It's his second novel ever published, not written, but published. That's after his first novel, Carrie, was published in 1975. Did you know that Salem's Lot was actually the third title for this book?
No.
Do you know either of the first two titles? I'll give you a clue. The first title was vetoed by his wife. The second title was vetoed by his editor.
Was it just racial epithets?
No.
Oh, okay. It's Stephen King, so I didn't know.
No. It's not that direction. It's the other direction.
Oh.
The original title was The Second Coming. And his wife said, it sounds like a pulpy porn novel. Well, of course, The Second Coming of Dracula is what it was supposed to be. And then the second, he changed it to Jerusalem's Lot, which his editor said, that sounds too religious. So he shortened it to Salem's Lot. Yes.
Okay.
It was inspired by Dracula and EC Vampire Comics. And the story goes that as he was having dinner with his family and he proposed the idea, what if Dracula came to the United States, and his wife said, well, he would probably be ran over by a cab in New York City, which led them to the idea of, well, what if he went to a small town in Maine? What would happen? And that, as he says in his introduction, that was kind of all the fuel he needed to go on and write the rest of this book.
I wish I could comprise something so small into something so large.
Yeah. novel was nominated for the World Fantasy Award in 1976, and it lost to Bid Time Return by Richard Matheson. I'm very familiar with Richard Matheson because I've read a bunch of his short stories in I Am Legend. I've never heard of this book.
I've also never heard of this.
I have also never heard of this book.
And we will be bringing up I Am Legend later because this is obvious. There's obvious similarities to Salem's Lot and I Am Legend.
Mm-hmm.
It was also nominated for the Locust Awards Best All-Time Fantasy Novel in 1987, which it lost to the Lord of the Rings, which is the greatest all-time fantasy novel. So that really makes sense.
What the fuck kind of award is that? The best all-time fantasy novel?
Yeah, well, they had like 50 nominations.
And this was one of them? That seems very strange to me.
I think part of why I like it so much is because it kind of jumps into the realm of fantasy. It very much feels like a fantasy novel to me.
I say I'm griping, but I'm kind of griping. You're taking all-time best fantasy novel. You're the Lord of the Rings guy. When was Lord of the Rings written?
Well, I think it was published first in 1955.
Okay. Like, I only imagine like somebody having this award show or award ceremony or whatever like that, and then they see Lord of the Rings on the list, and they were just like, why the fuck would we have other competitors in a fantasy-driven award show?
Yeah, it's kind of like, why are you... It's like, what's the greatest all-time vampire novel? It's Dracula.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a dissenting opinion, and you can make an argument for other books.
You could be wrong.
Yeah, you're allowed to be wrong.
That just seems like that seems like a stacked deck of an award ceremony.
I love myself some vampire novels. I will bring them up a lot, but if you're having best of all time, I'd be like,
it's Dracula.
Yeah, it's Dracula. Like, what am I supposed to say?
I mean, yeah, it is. Okay, so it has spawned a franchise, lots of other Salem's Lot media. There's a short story prequel, Jerusalem's Lot, which we will be discussing in a future episode. And then Jerusalem's Lot was adapted into a 2021 TV miniseries called Chapelwaite, starring Adrian Brody. There's also a short story sequel, One More for the Road. There are two TV miniseries adaptations, one from 1979, one from 2004. There's a BBC radio drama from 1995. It has one film sequel, A Return to Salem's Lot from 1989. I forgot to write this one down, but there is a 2004 illustrated edition that has deleted content, so it has additional content from Stephen King's original manuscript in it that's not included in any other version of the printed book. And there exists one film adaptation of this story. Nobody outside of Hollywood has ever seen it. But it has been filmed, and it exists. It is supposedly Salem's Lot 2023 by Gary Dauberman, which supposedly we might see on streaming services this fall, but there's been no official announcement of that.
I can hear his frustration as we've been trying to plan this Salem's Lot content for a literal year.
Yeah, it was supposed to come out spring of 2022, and our plan was we were going to cover it like right after we did it. Like, it was kind of like our first big project after The Stand.
Yeah.
And then we were going to do Salem's Lot. And then it got pushed back to, like, fall of last year. And then it got pushed to, like, spring of this year. And then they gave that slot to the Evil Dead movie, Evil Dead Rise.
Yeah.
And now it's just kind of...
in limbo.
Yeah. And it's been filmed, and it exists, and I've heard tertiary interviews of people who have seen test screenings of it, but there's been zero, like, official communication from Warner Brothers.
At this point, it honestly kind of feels like the Batgirl movie that WB scrapped.
Yeah.
I'll be more surprised if we actually see this.
Yeah, and obviously we will drop it. Like, we'll watch it day one, we'll record that day, we'll drop an episode ASAP if it ever happens, but...
Honestly, I'd be like, just make sure we're not drunk and saying anything too off the walls and just post it that night.
Sure, that's fine.
Then we're done. We can put it behind us.
And I don't even care if it's bad. I just want to see, like, how bad it is.
Yeah.
Like, and my expectations are so low, I don't think I could be made mad.
I want it to be so bad it's funny.
Yeah. But it'll probably just be so bad it's sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gary Doberman.
I like how Hef just keeps looking between the two of us ranting about this.
Yeah. I mean...
I have opinions, but...
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're not going to say them on the podcast about this...
I mean, it's just... What little I've read about it, like, it just makes no sense, with the exception of... The only thing I can think of is that no one cares.
Yeah.
People care.
But, like the priority is just so strange to me. Like, it's just like, yeah, people care, but, like, they're clearly not giving a fuck about us wanting to see
Warner
this.
Brothers doesn't care. Yeah.
I mean, Warner Brothers has not exactly been at the forefront of good decisions lately.
They're just a mess.
They
They're
put
just
out
a
The
total
Flash,
mess.
they should put this out. That is now my argument for everything after seeing The Flash.
That's a legitimate argument.
That movie was a mess.
Yay!
How could it not have been?
Go see The Flash? No. Go see Indiana Jones. Yay!
I have plans to go see that, actually, this weekend.
I saw it last night.
Well,
I
good.
think I'm going to finally go see Spider-Man.
Oh, that was not great.
That is depressing. I haven't seen it.
I was extremely disappointed.
Oh,
But,
the first one's so good.
yeah, I mean, but that's the thing, is, like, the first one is, like, one of the greatest all-time... Like, everybody says
It's the
that.
second best Spider-Man movie.
Everybody said... Every new superhero movie that comes, it's the greatest superhero... But
That one, that's
Into the
true.
Spider-Verse is one of the best all-time superhero movies.
They said that about The Flash. Like Tom Cruise and Stephen King both come out and say it's the greatest superhero film that we've seen in decades. And I'm saying that like, oh, okay. And I go and I watch it, and I'm like,
Stephen King back on cocaine?
and all I could think was, oh yeah, I forgot that you wrote and directed Maximum Overdrive.
So, to me, like, Across the Spider-Verse was just kind of set up to be, like, there's no way it could meet, like, those expectations, but
Yeah.
I have very specific criticisms of it also that I won't get into with people who haven't seen the movie.
Okay. Well,
And just because
soon.
I don't like it doesn't mean that you guys will. Emma loved it. Emma thought it was... She cried. She was so into it.
That's adorable.
And that's that. Another story in the classic, infallible three-act structure. Good enough for Aristotle, good enough for The Simpsons.
Mr. Sislak, I have a feeling there's going to be one more act to this story.
Well, I'm not hanging around for that. 4 acts.
Structures and themes. There's a big rant in the intro of this book about how Stephen King read Dracula, and it was his first exposure to an epistolary novel, and how this is kind of his modern take on Dracula and how much he loves epistolary novels. Daniel, can you tell us how this is sort of an epistolary?
You're gonna have to tell me what that word means.
It's your favorite kind of book.
Oh, okay. So journals, so books. Yeah. Okay.
How it kind of is, but it's mostly not.
I think it is in the sense that it how it jumps around from character perspectives. It's like jumping around between the journals. Mm-hmm. But it's not literally them writing down like what's previously happened. It's them experiencing it in the moment.
There are some newspaper articles
At the beginning, and at
the end.
And at the end. And I think those are the two best parts of the book.
Yeah.
It sandwiches it for me. Mm-hmm. And I honestly kind of would have liked more of that. I would have liked it kind of like interspliced in there, like maybe he finds stuff or finds notes.
If I could give like any kind of feedback, if this were being or if I were doing an adaptation,
You're doing the cover.
I would say, oh yeah, we didn't do the pre-show.
We'll record it after this.
We're going. If I would actually open this as, because the book already spoils for you that Ben Mears does not die.
Yeah.
So I would open it as his journal, his recollections, and then the things that, or at least the vignettes that aren't from his perspective, can be newspaper articles or something else.
Yeah.
But I think at least if you're going to do a movie and make it mostly from his perspective, his journal would be like a good framing device for the movie.
I agree with that. Yeah, that'd be good.
I don't feel like there's anything really extraordinary about it. Like, you're jumping from character to character.
Yeah.
Aside from the beginning where it's kind of giving you that, like, there's obviously a sense of dread that has occurred, and now we're going to go into, what caused the dread in the first place. And then everything else is just, you're bouncing back and forth from character to character. So, I mean, I don't feel like the structure is overall, especially for King, I feel like it's very linear.
Yeah,
all the characters, they jump around a lot, but it's still a linear timeline.
Yeah, it's nowhere near as ambitious as something like It.
No, it doesn't jump you back and forth in time or anything like that.
To me, this was like rubbing out the easy one for It. It is an epic book with a lot of world building, an ensemble cast. It's a story of good versus evil about a small town being plagued by a great evil, and it uses elements of epistolary novels. This is like its dumb little brother. I hate to put it like that, but it's like his.
It's simple.
Yeah, it's him practicing for what eventually would become his masterpiece, which is It.
The unambitious son.
Yeah.
Hey, Dad, can you get me a job down at the factory?
This is the Kane to It's Abel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what makes it a more, I think this is a much more accessible read.
Yes.
As far as a lot of his stuff.
Yes.
In fact, the fact that this was the one I started with as far as, his novels is probably actually one of the better routes I went.
And I told you to read this one first, specifically for that reason.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's structured very linearly, but there's a lot of stuff happening. So I mean, you still got to pay attention, but it is much more I don't have to worry about jumping in and out of time. So
yeah, I think this is true for characters, but also for the structure. There's certain Stephen King stereotypes, and you see the prototypes to all those stereotypes in this novel.
Yeah,
not his prose, the way he makes characters, the way he structures his books.
It seems drafty.
Author protagonists.
Yeah.
It seems drafty. This feels a lot like a draft for what would eventually become what he
usually
did
puts
do.
out. Yeah.
Here's a good time to bring up. So at the time I first read this was my third Stephen King book ever, and I thought it was the absolute shit. And now rereading it now, and I actually had to go back and count. First time, I had read 3 Stephen King books. This time, I have read 24 novels, 10 novellas, 69 short stories, 2 essays, 2 poems, and 1 comic that he's written.
Don't read any more short stories. Keep it at that number.
I'm going to keep it at that number forever. But now, after having read all of that Stephen King, it's much more obvious to me that Salem's Lot was one of his first attempts at writing a longer epic novel. And sort of the cracks in the armor, the kind of its weaknesses are a lot more obvious to me reading it the second time, as opposed to when I read it originally. Plus, when I read it originally, I had never read Dracula. I had never read I Am Legend, which are 2 books that are obviously hugely influential to Salem's Lot. And now I've read both of them, Dracula, multiple times, and it's and I'm constantly comparing it to both of those books, and that also hurt it a little bit. But okay, so let's go into themes. Daniel, small town horror.
It's Stephen King's bread and butter. This one is strong in especially that It sense that it builds up a lot of the town and its history. Mm-hmm. Talking about the house a lot. Mm-hmm. It talks about
Marston House,
the affairs going on, or how one dude killed his cheating wife and her body's still at the bottom of a well and nobody even knows about it.
Yes.
That sort of stuff's all there, and it feels like he was pouring in all of those ideas for what he thinks that small town horror is. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the monster that shows up, it's the way people live and interact with each other.
Yep.
It's the way they treat the out-of-towner or author.
Yep.
Some of them are see him and they're oh yeah, he's that writer, or he's cool, but a lot of them are eyeing him with that, why do we have somebody driving through our town suspicion?
And we can also bring up, and feel free to comment on either of these, but now something I have later on the list, which is xenophobia.
Yeah.
Which is a huge theme in this book.
You talk! I mean, about xenophobia?
Or small town horror, just...
Oh, okay. I mean, it's one of those... I've read a couple of instances of small town horror now, and I mean, like with Phantoms and various Uzumaki. Like, yeah, there's various other
Pet
ones
Cemetery,
I've read.
H.P. Lovecraft.
Just anything.
This one is it's scattered but focused, because like there's a lot of people to keep track of, to the point where I constantly had to go back and forth and remind myself who I was reading about. Like, because I think I counted, and I don't know if this is right, but I think I counted like 25 different characters.
Oh, there's way more than 25.
I'm reading a book now that it's the third in a trilogy, and it has to include a glossary in the back of 50 different named characters, and that's not even all the characters.
I've also read the Canterbury Tales.
I don't know what that is.
Lord of the Rings also has that.
Yeah. And I'm like, I wouldn't be able to keep track of this if I did not have this glossary to keep referring to.
Yeah, but the small town horror aspect is very much like, yes, you have a lot of characters, but like them all being in the same town in this very insular part, like where everything kind of weaves with everything else, makes it a little bit more like I think he does a good job of like actually like making everybody kind of communicate with one another. So at least if you don't necessarily know what their story is going in, you have at least an idea of where they fit into the overall story of what he's trying to tell. So
yeah, he does a good job of like explaining the theres between all the various people. So you can be like, who is this guy? Oh, okay, I know who this is because of their relationship to this other thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of like it's a map. You have to follow it, but it is still like you can still kind of identify people. And I think that's what makes the small town horror aspect pretty unique, in that everybody kind of knows everybody, and in you reading it, you kind of become part of that small town that is actually having the events that happen and unfold, which I think actually makes it feel a little bit more intimate for the reader.
For me, like, the greatest thing about the small town horror is that you think you're about to read the scariest book ever, and it's about vampires, but it's not the vampires that are scary. It's what the people do behind closed doors. And there's this part of the book where Ben is going down the road and he's looking at all these closed doors, and he's thinking about how you never know what goes on in a person's home behind closed doors. And then you have all the little vignettes about the woman who beats her baby, or how she's unhappy with her life and how her husband is unhappy with his life. Or you have the really lonely old woman who spends all day sitting at home spying on her neighbors with her binoculars. And you just hear about all these terrible things that real people do during the day to themselves and to their family. And then, like Daniel said, the guy who murdered his cheating wife, and then that's in contrast to what happens at night with actual literal monsters, literal vampires. And for me, it's the beating of the baby that is scary, not the vampire trying to suck your blood.
For me, they're both scary. I started locking my windows again.
Yeah. I think it also it tries to explore like different, I'm not gonna say tropes because I don't feel like that's the right word, but like everybody I think who lives in a small town has experienced some idea of the characters that are in this book. So like some of the stories stick out a little bit more than others depending on your own life experience. So I think it has a much more broad readership than a lot of his other books, because you have these random characters in there that like you can kind of identify with because you have either experienced them in some way, shape, or form, or somebody who has.
Yeah, and that's a pro of having like an ensemble cast. Like there's usually somebody you can latch onto.
Yeah.
Okay, so another theme is big E evil versus little e evil. Just want to drop that here. We're going to bring that up more in The Power of Christ Compels You. And then big government is not something that I like really picked up on in my reading of it, but something that comes up a lot in like secondary sources that are like talking about this book, where this was written in the mid-70s, right after the Watergate scandal, and it kind of being like a anti-authoritarian book where it's very skeptical of like the very rich and it's not something that sticks out to me a lot when I read it, but it is something that comes up in a lot of other reviews of this book that I've read.
It sticks out to me, not a lot. Not a lot as like some other things. It ties into the xenophobia. It's not just like the small town people are eyeing a stranger. Who are these homophobic slur here for opening an antique shop in our town?
I think they're queer for each other.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
right.
But there's a certain level of elitism that they that exists on the vampire because he has an antique store.
Yeah.
And that's like a big fancy store in the middle of this town. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, and they're European.
Yeah, and everyone's kind of like side-eyeing, glancing at it because they're like, well, what's this doing here?
Two men who live together opening an antique store in rural Maine. Like,
I think it focuses way more on xenophobia than it does on like the rich. But I think there's like a little bit of that in there.
Yeah,
it's like the sprinkles on top of the ice cream.
Yeah, it's obviously. I think that's kind of the thing that's not said, because it's like obviously they have money if they're buying all this expensive furniture,
and they're throwing their money around. That's how they're buying all the property. Or I will buy it for $1.
But the town doesn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're going to fill out the paperwork saying this, and we will give you all of this stuff. And it reminds me very much of like there's always, at least every other month, there's a leak of some politician who's made some sort of backdoors deal, and they never have to pay for it. And that's what it reminds me of, is like the backdoor deal that didn't get revealed yet.
Yeah.
So, and it cost the town everything. It literally cost the town.
I think the xenophobia is a little bit more on the nose.
Yeah.
In the book.
It's very Lovecrafty.
I don't even necessarily would call it Lovecrafty as much as I would just call it just rural skepticism.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like most, and I'm not trying to generalize, but like rural towns tend to have a habit of anything that's kind of different or goes against the religious values of the said rural town that goes along with it generally is not accepted up front. And it's one of those things where, like, at least from what I've seen, at least around certain parts of areas, is it's not outright rejection, it's just kind of internal judgment. Like, kind of like behind closed doors whisper about these people. Like, you never bring it up to them, directly to them. You always just talk about it when they're not around.
To me, it's like, it's almost worse than outright rejection. It's like hypocritical acceptance, like, oh, welcome to the town. Then wait till you leave and then talk about you behind your back.
They call you the F slur when you're not there.
Yeah.
No, I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's what this, I feel like this book like pushes that, not pushes, but like it definitely has influences of that, and unfortunately it's understandable because
it's very real.
It's a very real thing. And I mean, and that's the worst part about it, is you eventually get into the point where it becomes toxic in a way where a lot of people don't even think of it as toxic, because I'm not saying it to their face, I'm not doing it to them outright, but you're still having those thoughts. You're still talking about it openly with other people who aren't engaged with it, and that's kind of the problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Except this time they're right.
Well, about Barlow and Straker, but not about Ben.
But I think it matches it matches the small town feel. I don't like it, but it does match.
You're a stranger until you've been here for 20 years, Mr. Mears. I had the FBI check you out. You're clean. It's got leftist politics. He marched in Washington. Oh.
Thanks, buddy.
Okay, so another theme, and this is something that we haven't really talked about in a while. It's an apocalyptic story, but it's a micro-apocalypse. Instead of the end of the world, it's the end of a small part of the world. And we brought this up in Phantoms, where it's the end of a town, the end of a people, the people who live in this town. And Phantoms is another good example of that. Another one that I've read is a Australian horror novel called Soon by Lois Murphy. And it's a story of a rural outback town in Australia that, without getting into spoilers or specifics, is invaded by this group of monsters that basically kills off or forces about 95% of this town to leave, and there's like less than 20 people still living there, and it's about those people and how they continue to live under this rule of these beings. Interesting book.
Micro-apocalypse is...
Actually sounds really cool.
Well, man, micro-apocalypse is actually a cool concept that I don't think it's explored as much as, like, I would like to see it. Like, when you go to, like, you know, major bookstores or even just, like, major films, like, they always concentrate on, like, the major apocalypse, you know, world destruction or whatever like that. Whereas something more insular, like this book or Phantoms or like that, that's so much more interesting.
Yeah.
Because, like, there's... like, that really puts you and your characters in a spot where they're... you don't have, like escape isn't as likely because of how small it is, because you don't have the outside world coming in to help. That's, like, the big thing I always kind of fight with apocalypse novels and stories, is just eventually you kind of have this, like, mentality that it's all going to be okay in the end. Whereas with micro-apocalypse stories, your eventuality is much more uncertain because the outside world doesn't know what's happening most of the time, and it's usually much more insular, which makes it a little bit more higher stakes to me. I like that a little bit more.
Daniel, do you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, I don't have much to add to that. So.
It's also, in a way, it's sort of an epidemic, because, like, the early part of the novel is really, it's almost treated like a plague, where Danny Glick gets sick, and then Lloyd Tibbetts gets sick, and then, like, and it's almost like this sickness that's spreading throughout the town. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that really put me back in I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, where, if you've seen the Will Smith movie, the novel is totally different. One, because the monsters are actual literal vampires, and the epidemic that spreads through the world in the novel is vampirism, and it's literally people coming down with the sickness and becoming vampires. And
an unexpected consequence of a untested vaccine.
Oh, you, Richard Matheson, you silly anti-vaxxer.
I couldn't resist. I saw that on the notes, and I was like, I have to make my joke.
That's fine. But yeah, as much as this book reminds me of Dracula, it also reminds me of I Am Legend a lot.
It also again, because I've said this for structure, and I'll say it again here. You see a lot of, like, the prototypes of stuff that Stephen King will do. You see some of, like, the early writings of what he would use in The Stand.
In the same ways that I was saying, like, it felt like a forerunner for it. It feels like a forerunner for The Stand in a lot of ways, too.
Yeah. I like how, scientifically might be the wrong word, but they treat the, like, early symptoms of vampirism, or, like, their suspicions of it with a almost, like, scientific quality. Mm-hmm. Like, they're like, we need to see if this works. I'm going to stay up and see what happens now. Mm-hmm. Does the cross actually work?
Oh, it does.
Stuff like that. And I'm like, that's kind of... Because, let's say our city became infected with vampirism. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would probably start trying to... I'd have to see what works.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be one.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I want to be one too much. It just depends on my mood.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you now that, like, if we have one pinned in here and I use a cross on it and it actually starts to burn, much like Dean Koontz, I will be converting to Catholicism.
Yeah. I mean, like, what do you do at that point?
I actually have that later in our outline. That is something we will talk about in The Power of Christ Compels
I guess you could try, like, the Jewish star, too, and see if it's just any symbol.
just like anything. It's like, what is it, The Mummy at the end, or in the middle, whenever he's, like...
The cat.
No, whenever...
When he's, like, pulling up...
Yeah, he's pulling out every single thing. Just be like, which one of these works?
My buddy Benny!
Goodbye, Benny.
Oh, Benny. Okay, and then our last theme, which some people may say is the most important, but I might say is the least important. Vampires.
I would say that it's incidental in the fact that you could probably replace it with a different monster, and the novel would...
werewolves?
It would change what they had to do to defend themselves,
And maybe like how it spreads.
Yeah, but would it change would it change the way the town acts? Would it change the characters over? I don't think so.
No.
I think werewolves actually would have been better. Like, if we're talking here. I can explain later.
read the Howling.
All right, well, we'll touch more on that and scary shit. And since you mentioned characters...
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Let's go ahead and jump to characters. Now, what I've done...
There's so many, oh my god.
What I've done is I've listed out our crew. Like, the ensemble crew. Plus Barlow and Straker. And then we'll have a section to mention, like, any other ones that we feel like are worth talking about.
Yeah, if I get some of these names backwards, I apologize.
That's fine.
But
we'll start with our, like, Dracula-esque crew of heroes who have decided to fight against this evil. And of course, we're going to start with our main character, Ben Mears.
Yeah, he's the Stephen King writer character.
Yes, modern Jonathan Harker.
Somebody else want to start?
Before we jump into the actual character himself, I do want to make it a point in saying that I think the characters, if I had to give a criticism, are the weakest part of the book.
I agree.
Yeah. Also there. Hooray. We're all on board.
They were the biggest reason there were two things. But the bigger of the two...
Why I went from a 10 to an 8.5.
...was I kept comparing Ben to Jonathan Harker. I kept comparing Susan to Mina Harker.
That's not fair.
I kept comparing Matt Burke to Van Helsing. Like
You can compare the rest of them to the track, but you can't compare anyone to Mina.
Yeah, and I actually think Susan is better than Ben.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Mina's one of the greatest like literary characters like out there. So
I don't think Ben is bad. I do think he is just the Stephen King writer character.
I don't think any of them are.
Yeah.
Bad.
But
they're unremarkable though.
Yeah, that's the word. And when this first came out, there was not the Stephen King writer character.
Yeah.
But now when you go back and read, it's like, yeah, he's Stephen King writer character.
Like, I roll.
And he's not as interesting as other Stephen King writer characters because he learned to write them better over time.
And he's just not nearly as fleshed out as most of Stephen King's like other characters. And another thing I struggled with this book is it's way shorter than I remembered. I thought it was much longer than
I remember it being like 600 pages. I think it's like 450 or something.
It depends on the version you get.
Yeah.
I actually think like a small like vignette chapter on each of these main characters just to kind of flesh out their backstory would have helped it a lot for me.
Hold on, I got an impression for Ben here. Let me put on my best Batman voice. My wife is dead.
I mean, you get the fact that his wife died in a motorcycle crash, and you get his story about moving to live with his aunt and him seeing Hubie what's his face?
Yeah.
Hubie Marston's corpse. And that's really all you kind of get to... I mean, he's written these books, and you would learn a little about these books. But if you compare him to, like, Jack Torrance or Bill Denbrough, I mean...
I think it's funny when he's talking about his books, I've read it as, this is what Stephen King fears his career is going to end up as.
Yeah. Don't worry, Steve. You're fine.
He has to be at this point. I think Ben's biggest problem is... It is, unlike a lot of other Stephen King protagonists, is he has his conflict. Like, he has his actual thing that, like, drives his character, but the problem is that the actual thing that drives him is very one-dimensional. Like, there is nothing deeper than the fear of what he experienced with Hubie Marston. He tries to make his wife a much more prevalent, like, point of his character,
but it's not developed enough.
It just doesn't sell. Yeah, like, it's just not fleshed out enough.
And like for almost all of these characters, and I think there's one exception which we'll get to. For all of them, I feel like there's the bones of a good character here, but it's just too shallow. It's too one-dimensional. Like, we just needed more from each one of these people, and we could have had a great character. And that's why I feel like it's so obvious to me right now, after reading all of these Stephen King books, that this is one of his earlier ones, because he's just so much more focused on the world building of the town and the vignettes, which is fine because that's the best part of the book.
The spooky scares.
Yeah.
Which is fine because there are some effective scares here.
But when you get to some of like his 80s novels, like Pet Sematary and It, where he can fire on both cylinders.
Yeah, you get everything you want.
Yeah.
He also doesn't grapple with his conflicts. Like, his characters are just like, they're like, in this book, like their characters there, they have their little struggles or whatever like that, but they don't ever really have a conflict with anything they're dealing with.
Yeah, there's not like an internal conflict.
No, there's no there's no defining moment for them to triumph over something.
You have his like thing with his dead wife, but it feels more like just a backstory as opposed to something for him to overcome to me.
Yeah,
Right.
there's no like arc.
Yeah, like it's not him realizing it's not my fault or stuff like that.
It's not like, if I feel like if he wrote this book today, Ben would be like blaming himself for the death of his wife.
And it would be,
like through his relationship with Susan, he would like learn to forgive himself or something like that.
Yeah, stuff like, I feel like it's missing just that like final touch on that.
Yeah.
Especially for Ben. And it sucks because he's the main character.
Yeah.
Something else that bothered me immensely, is it just me, or did you guys feel like that he really didn't get that upset when Susan died? I mean,
how long did he know her?
Yeah, but I was willing to suspend my disbelief and believe that they had actually fallen in love with each other. But then he doesn't really, he's upset, but he doesn't get very upset.
I don't know. I think that it's sometimes that's hard to convey. Because there's a line between like showing genuine upsetness and melodrama as well. And maybe I feel like King erred on the side of caution with
I don't know. I didn't have any trouble believing that Louis Creed was upset when Gage died. Maybe that's not fair.
My reasoning for why that wasn't as effective is actually less Ben and more Susan. And I can
Well, let's jump to Susan.
Sure. Okay.
She reminds me of like the last few girls I've dated.
Okay. Lucky you.
It's a good story.
Especially the way her parents feel about the writer.
Susan goes along with the trope that we have made jokes about previously, where Stephen King wrote in the 70s.
Yeah.
She's a woman in a book written in the 70s.
She is.
She does try. She tries her best.
She does.
I think she's maybe just a smidge better than that. But yeah.
Not by much. I think
smidge.
that's a smidge.
Like she gets a piece of wood and goes, "I'll go up to the house."
Yeah.
No, that's where I think there's just a little bit of Mina Harker in her. Not a lot, not enough, but there's a little bit. What I like about Susan is that she's like the only character that they don't convince that the vampires are real right away. She's the only one who retains any logic or reason about, or logic and reason, that's not right. She's the only one who's cynical about the fact that the town is being, but to the point where she doesn't believe it enough that she's like, you know what, fuck this, I'm gonna go prove you all wrong. Which gets her killed.
Witches aren't real.
Yeah, that's fine.
Because that's what it kind of reminds me of, is her just staring at them like they're fucking stupid.
But if I told you that our town was getting taken over by vampires, would you believe me as fast as Jimmy Cody believes them?
If you told me yes. If Hef told me yes.
Okay, well, if somebody else told you.
Probably not. I'd be a little bit more skeptical.
My smart-ass response would be, I didn't know Johnny Depp was making guest appearances in West Virginia.
But I do feel that enough of us are, genre savvy enough to where if one of you guys suspected real supernatural shit was happening, I'd be like, you know what? No chances. Let's do this.
Yeah, I mean, I would never say Bloody Mary 3 times. I wouldn't chance it. But I probably wouldn't believe it. And Susan is... I actually think she's a little more fleshed out, and she has a little bit more inner conflict because of her relationship with her mother.
Yeah.
Than a lot of the other characters here. But she's not enough.
A lot of mothers have hated me.
And maybe it's not fair to compare her to Mina Harker, but when you're writing a modern day Dracula and you have the one female character,
here's the woman.
Yeah, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I still say the time frame has a lot to do with that.
Yeah,
I just don't think her Susan to me just is one of those characters where there could have been. I mean, all of them technically you can make this argument for, but Susan especially, Susan could have been so much more than what she was, and I was just I hate to be there. I was just constantly disappointed with her actions. Like, as far as like her actually going to the
Marston
the
house.
Marston house. Like, I'm just like, why? What? Don't be dumb. Don't do that.
I really liked it. Like, I
did.
that's one of my favorite parts about her character, because like, if you have no reason to think that vampires are actually taking over your town, why wouldn't you just go straight to the source and just disprove it all and end all the controversy? I also love the line where she's on her way up to the Marston house and she's thinking about going to all those drive-in movies and having her head on her date's shoulders and seeing all those beautiful women in those horror movies, like going down into the basement and thinking, dumb bitch, I would never do that. Oh, and then she's doing it. Like, that's actually like one of my favorite parts about her, is that she goes to the Marston house.
I just, again, like, it's not specifically just her. It's just, I had this problem with a lot of them.
I mean, honestly, it's mainly the entire full main cast.
Yeah, I'm not trying to bitch about one more than the others. Like, I generally, looking back on it, I had this problem with basically all of them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree. Any closing thoughts on Susan, Daniel?
No, I think we hit Susan pretty well.
Okay.
So did Ben.
So did Marlowe.
Ben staked her.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, he got the final one in.
Oh, you meant literally. I was thinking about when they had sex in the park.
No, I was actually being physically literal.
Okay. All right, Mark Petrie.
Too old for what he was.
I didn't buy this kid
mentally.
at all.
He's my favorite.
He was too on top of things.
If it wouldn't have been for the escaping from the ropes, like, I love that scene because he gets to throw one over on Straker, and that's really cool. But I just don't buy a 10-year-old kid having the mental fortitude to do what he does.
Yeah, this was very much like a very problem with, like, how do I write a kid? Like, how smart do I write a kid?
And Stephen King can write kids really well, but you see in his earlier books that he struggles with it. And it's the same thing with, like, his next novel, The Shining. Danny Torrance, who is a 5-year-old kid, but he talks like a 45-year-old man, is the same issue he has with Mark Petrie. King had a learning curve on writing kids, and it's not really until, like, you get to, like, Firestarter and then eventually to
Where they
It.
feel like children.
Yeah,
Did
exactly.
you all read Desperation?
Yeah.
No.
Desperation kind of had this problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, which my argument is that Desperation is basically like that's like his filler book.
Yeah.
Because it, like, has all of these things that, like, he had done up to that point. Like, Desperation feels like, I'll tell you what it feels like. Y'all ever watch Wolf's Rain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know those 4 episodes of filler we got?
Yeah.
That's Desperation.
No, I haven't seen Wolf's Rain
have you read
since
the,
high school.
There are 4 filler episodes. Like, 4 episodes of or recap episodes, I'm sorry.
So
Yeah.
that's the OVA.
But, like, whenever you bought the, like, American, like, release on DVD, it's released as 30 episodes.
Yeah, but originally that wasn't part of the TV series. That's just something that Bandai bundled with it to make it longer.
And I didn't know that. And that made me very upset because I spent $30 on 4 episodes of what I already knew.
The majority of the time, not always, but the majority of the time, when you're watching, like, an anime series that was released in that era and there are recap episodes included in the series, it's actually a standalone OVA that was released separately in Japan.
I do know that. Still felt like kind of a bite in the ass. But that's what Desperation is to me. Because Desperation basically, like, takes all of these crazy different things from all of the books he's compiled so far to the point where it feels like the most unoriginal thing he's ever written.
Have you read the Regulators yet?
No.
It's Desperation, but Stephen King rewrote it as his other persona.
I know of
Bachman.
this. Yeah, I know of it. I haven't read it, though.
It's way better.
Is it?
It's so much better.
Yeah.
It's like Desperation, but hyper-violent.
So what I like about Mark Petrie is I like his monster obsession.
Yeah, he's a little horror nerd. He's just like me.
Yeah. But
He's collecting his little figurines just like Daniel. I love him.
But how he, like... I'm constantly rolling my eyes at him. Like, the scene with the bully, I'm like, sure. The scene where Danny Glick comes to his window, I'm like, sure. The scene where he gets out of the ropes, I'm like, sure.
Oh, I loved all of this.
I mean, I liked them the first time.
Yeah.
I liked them the first time I read it. I didn't like them the second time I read it.
Yeah, I still like Mark. I want to ruffle his hair.
I like him as a person, but I don't buy it. I don't swallow it. It's like, I have not met a kid that obviously exceptional children exist. And obviously this is a piece of fiction.
I think that he's literally the only one that gets a payoff for that sort of writing, because he gets overconfident because he keeps figuring all this shit out. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is his parents' face gets smashed together because he's the one who poked the bear the most.
Yeah, he gets punished for it.
Yeah, so I think that's why I give it a pass, is because he gets all this exceptional shit, and then he gets punished for it.
And part of, I do sort of agree with you, because he, like Susan, is the other character who says, let's just go to the source of it.
Yeah, let's just get it.
Let's go kill him.
I already scared this one vampire. I can do this. I'm smart. I beat up the bully.
They go for different reasons. Susan goes because she does not believe that they are vampires. I'm just going to go knock on the door, talk to these people, and settle this crap. And Mark is like, I'm just going to go kill the head vampire.
He even brought a proper steak.
Yeah. So did Susan, but it wasn't proper. She brought a steak.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah, he brought one that would work. Like, he's like, no, that's not going to work. Its dimensions are all wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to hit that twice with the hammer and it's going to break.
Yeah. I think that's why I give him a pass, though, is because he's the one that gets that arc of, you're the overconfident little shit. Everything's going your way until it doesn't.
He was my favorite character the first time I read the book, but I think with him, I was just spending too much time comparing him to the Losers Club and how, like, they all feel like real kids.
Yeah, that feels like the Mina comparison to me too. So.
I know, but I can't. And maybe it's not fair, but I'm still going to compare the Avengers to Justice League.
This one's more fair though, because they were both Stephen King.
Yeah.
So
true. And also,
probably the best written children in horror fiction.
Yeah, I agree. And also Charlie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gage.
And Ellie. Okay.
Any other thoughts?
Mark, that was it. Mark was too smart.
Okay.
Like, that bothered me a lot.
Now, to the what I, in my opinion, is the least remarkable of the unremarkable Dr. Jimmy Cody, who will believe anybody and anything.
He is my favorite character.
Okay,
tell. I love the Hey Buddy character.
Hey buddy.
Like, hey man, I got this thing for you, and like,
all right, cool, let's do it.
Like, let's do it. Yeah, like I love this kind of character because like it's so stellar. Like, everybody else like kind of bothered me in how superficial and not quite deep enough we got. Jimmy, we didn't have to, because he's literally the Hey Buddy of the book. And that's what made him kind of a fun ride to go with to me, because like I didn't have to think hard about Jimmy. I just had to go along for the ride.
I'm going to put on pants. I'm going to put on a fedora and a trench coat and a black belt.
Hi,
and I'm going to pretend to be Daniel. And I'm going to tie this to the ring.
Yay!
My Koontz for Ring, the novel by Koji Suzuki, was that everybody believes Asakawa right off the bat without questioning it at all. And that is Jimmy Cody in a nutshell. Hey, can you come talk to me and Mr. Burke? Hey, we think the town is being taken over by vampires. Okay.
Sweet.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
To me, he felt like he was just like, and again, this probably isn't fair, but he's just like the worst Dr. Seward. He's like, I don't know. But if you look at him, I mean, like, I feel like it has to be on purpose. Like, Ben Mears is Jonathan Harker. Susan is Ina Harker. Matt Burke is Van Helsing. Dr. Cody is Dr. Seward. Like,
aside from the doctor part, like, I think that, like, I saw Jimmy Cody as much more the,
Mark is the Logan.
I saw him much more as the Quincy, because he's just like, Quincy's just like, fuck yeah, let's just go do it.
Yeah, you're right. I can see that.
Mark is the little kid from Indiana Jones too.
And in, like
Short
I said,
round.
in Dracula, I loved Quincy. Like, he's just kind of that character that's just like, no, he's the Hey Buddy character.
Guess what my Koontz for Dial of Destiny is?
No short round.
No short round.
I've been saying for years, it's fine if you replace Indiana Jones, but you don't need to invent a new character to do it.
Make it short round.
Short round exists.
And Kehu Kwan is actually like
a good actor.
And he's back.
Yeah.
Like, he just won one of those awards.
He's a super hot property. You want to replace Shia LaBeouf? Bring back Short Round.
Oh, God.
He's got
Remind me,
spoilers.
after you guys have seen Dial of Destiny, say Shia LaBeouf. Because I have comments, but I can't. It's just... All right.
Sure.
All right, so let's go back to Matt Burke, who, like Mark Petrie, I loved the first time I read this book, and then just bothered the hell out of me the second time. But I'll bury the lead and let one of you guys give your opinions on Mr. Burke.
He's just that intellectual character that just kind of has to, like... Him, I think I can kind of buy a little bit because, like, he has the actual experience of having this thing come to try to get him. Because he doesn't start buying into it until he brings that guy, the one guy home.
And then he dies that night.
And he dies that night, and he actually hears something on the other end of the wall. So, like,
Mike Ryerson.
Right.
Yeah.
So Matt, I'm a little bit less biased on because, like, he's literally listening to the act. And then he comes to his conclusion that something is happening. And he does have a little bit of internal dialogue that says, I know what I heard, I know what my brain is telling me, but I very much do not like it.
Yeah, I still can't believe it.
Yeah, I still can't quite fathom it because he brings he brings Ben, he brings Ben over to say, like, even talk to him through it, be like, what I'm going to tell you is crazy. But I have 100% faith that this is what I heard. So, like, he's kind of the tension of, like, you know, that less believable, where everybody jumps on board to be like, yeah, vampires, whatever, like that. He's kind of the turning point where him and Ben are talking about this to the level of, if we have to accept that this exists, we're kind of fucked. So, like, I like that Matt is kind of the turning point for that because he's in disbelief. He doesn't want to, but, like, what he's heard makes it so that they have to start, well, not maybe Ben, but definitely Matt has much more proclivity to have the belief that this is actively happening.
Yeah.
So, like, Matt I'm a little bit more, I'm less critical of because he actually experienced the thing.
Yeah.
I don't have... Yeah, I agree with everything you said. My criticisms of Matt aren't the same criticisms I have of Mark. They're more similar to Ben, where he's just very underdeveloped. You know, like, almost nothing about him. He's a bachelor, and he teaches English. And that's basically all you know.
Oh, 100%.
And what really, like, got my eyes rolling is, like, Stephen King trying way too hard to let you know he's cool.
Does that mean he's a gay?
No, he's like... the part where he's like, I even tried it once. He's talking about how he tried marijuana, or how many times does it mention how much Matt likes rock and roll? He likes rock and roll.
Yeah. He's the fun one.
Yeah. Or he goes to bars on Saturday night and listens to the loud rock and roll music. Like, it just, yeah. But everything you said, I agree with.
Yeah. I think your points were very concise. My only thing that I would add is I would have condensed him down into also Jimmy. So
yeah, I could see.
Well, the scene where, like, he's actually hearing the sucking sounds, like, that's one of my favorite scenes in the book. Like, that gave me actual chills.
That is my favorite scene in the book.
Yeah, it's actual chills. So, like,
we'll save that for scary shit. All right, so Father Callahan,
second favorite character.
He, to me, I think he's kind of the exception of this group of unremarkable people. And to be fair, this is also the one character that Stephen King continues on in other books, and he appears in other stories. So
I just like I said with Mark, he's another character in this book that sort of gets a payoff for all of the stuff that's going on, like both externally and internally with the character, like his struggles with evil, his struggles with faith, and confronting true evil.
Yeah, he gets his arc.
Yeah.
Like, he has his arc.
And he also is punished for it, which I enjoy.
And this is only a part of his story. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but we will meet Father Callahan again in the Dark Tower.
Which one?
Which one?
In the Dark Tower series. He will be back.
Pick the number 1 through 7, Daniel.
4.
There you
That's
go.
my guess.
All right. Yeah. I like God, you fucker. Yeah. I liked Father Callahan a lot because like he got his arc and like he's a necessary character if you are along with the whole like religious part being an aspect of it. Like it's only natural that he's there, and the fact that like he didn't just write him as a strict. We went to our local priest and he was just like, yes, my good son, I will help you. It's just like, yeah, he will, but like he's got that extra stuff that's going on in the background that you've now understood that, yes, he's a priest, but he is very much struggling with his faith. He's very much having doubts about did he make the right decision?
Have you guys watched Midnight Mass yet?
No.
Watch Midnight Mass this weekend.
No.
Yeah.
I really like the character archetype of the cynical priest. And I like him because, like Susan, he doesn't really believe until it's actually proven to him with his own eyes, which is actually very ironic for a priest. But like Dr. Cody...
Lazarus, come forth.
But like Dr. Cody, he goes along from it with a start, but just because he feels like if I don't, and if it's real, then...
I just like the scene of him with this 10-year-old boy talking to the parents. No, I swear it's vampires. This won't age poorly into a parody.
No.
Yeah. He also, like... Oh, God, he gets the worst fate of everybody. Like, I think. Because I believe it's him that, like he just... Like, where they turn him, right? Or,
Yeah.
like, they... Like, Marlowe actively turns him just to punish him. Like, I feel like he has the worst fate of everybody because he now has to.
He does, but he doesn't. Barlow doesn't like retain any control over him. He lets him loose from like the vampire hive mind, so that he can just kind of like suffer on his own.
Yeah, it's like it's probably the deepest like character trauma I think that we get in the book.
Yeah.
Like and it's awful because like it's so good though because like he has his shaken faith. And then he finally is like, I found my calling. I made the right choice. And then all of a sudden it's just like, no, now you're fucked. Because now you have to exist in this state of uncleanliness for the rest of however long you exist. And it's just like, goddamn.
She comes to me, tells me that she beat her baby one more goddamn time.
Yeah.
I fucking love that when he's like in the confessional and he's just like complaining about the same, like people coming to him with the same old shit. And he's just like, maybe I should come out there and beat you for a minute.
Kind of reminded me of Father Garai.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh, I know Yuki does all these terrible things, but I can't tell the police because I'm a priest. Like, I could never be a priest because I would tell the police.
In timeline number 4, I'm a priest.
Yeah. Okay, and then touching on our villains, Barlow and Straker.
Serviceable.
I have mixed feelings when it comes to Barlow. So obviously his character is boring.
Yeah.
To me. Like there's nothing.
He's Dracula.
He only appears like 3 to 4 times.
Yeah.
But unlike Dracula, I didn't want more of Barlow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't interesting.
I liked him as a source of the infection of the shit that I actually found spooky.
I like him off page.
Yeah.
Since you guys are bringing this up, what I find like about Barlow that I do like is in most media these days, the villain has to be explained.
Yeah.
Everybody has to explain why the villain is the way they are.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad that in this book they don't.
It's just
He's a vampire.
He's a vampire. Don't overcomplicate it. He's a source of evil.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to justify why he's evil. He's just evil.
I think it works especially for this book.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, there's I don't know. I think we're oversaturated with like having to explain.
The reason
why
I say they're
everybody's-
serviceable is because they're not deep, but they work for what they are.
they work. Yeah, but yeah,
They're just, to me, they're the least interesting part about the horror in the story.
I agree.
Which to me is like the town slowly being destroyed by letting in this thing.
I agree.
Yeah. And of the two of them, Straker is definitely the more interesting character.
Yeah.
The familiar. Normally, like, the familiar or the lackey character is the one that takes less of the screen time, but he has way more page time than Barlow does, and I think, and his confrontation with Mark, even though I roll my eyes about Mark being able to get out of those ropes, I think where Mark ambushes Straker is one of the high points of the book.
Yeah.
I think it's a very well written part.
I think Straker was Stephen King's saying, I want Renfield to do more.
Yeah.
Because he's just kind of this weird character that just exists in this, like, small town, and he's, like, the face of it, and...
I want a flamboyant familiar.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I
want
like...
Nicholas Hoult to be my familiar.
That movie had no right to be as good as it was.
No, I hate to say, but I kind of expected it to be really good. Like,
Really?
Yeah. Like Nick Cage, Nick Hoult, like
Fuck you, Kyle.
from the director of Lego Batman.
That movie was such a good time. I'm so sad that it didn't do better.
Well, there was just too high competition.
Yeah. At least Cocaine Bear did it decent.
Yeah. Elizabeth Banks, Cocaine Bear 2.
Is there any other characters for us to know?
The Cocaine-ing.
Yes. I have one.
You have one?
I do have one.
Who are we noting?
Ava, the innkeeper.
Okay.
I love her subplot with Weasel.
With Weasel, yeah.
It's one of my favorite parts of the book.
Her ending broke my heart.
Yeah.
Like, just that last scene with her just being like, like the questioning the faith that she had as far as like her, her love for her husband or whatever like that, and then he just comes up behind her and then just takes her into darkness.
Yeah.
Like, there was only one point where I put the book down specifically out of being awed, and that was it.
Okay, that's good job.
Thank you. I guess.
I really like Mike Ryerson, the groundskeeper.
Mm-hmm.
I think my favorite scene of the book is where he's visited by Danny Glick in Matt's house, and one of my other favorite scenes from the book is where he's digging Danny Glick's grave, and it's like describing like how he feels like he's not getting anywhere, and he just keeps looking up, and the sun's in different positions every time he looks up, and then he looks down, and he's only shoveled like 2 mounds of dirt since the last time he looked. And those two scenes, plus I also really like the scene at Dell's where Matt picks him up at the bar, and he's just like he's just explaining that he's sick, and if you don't know it's about vampires, you're just like, yeah, he's sick. He's sick. But if you know it's about vampires, you're like screaming at the page, he's a vampire. He's turned into a vampire. Yeah. I really like Mike Ryerson and Weasel Craig and even more. I really like their subplot.
Who is the guy at the dump?
Doug Rogers.
Yeah,
Doug Rogers.
Okay. I found him funny.
Yeah, he's not a good character. He's kind of like a prototype trash can man.
Yeah, it's like a joke, but I mean, like I was there for it. It was funny.
I really wish that Ezra Miller played Doug Rogers in the new Salem slot.
Oh, he plays him in The Flash.
He plays trash can man in The Stand.
Oh, yeah, I remember. My life for you. Jerking off to a slow motion explosion. We really need to turn those into GIFs. Trash Can Man Ezra Miller GIFs.
Surely that exists. I found a Spice Weasel GIF earlier today.
Wow.
Yeah, they exist.
Yeah, that's the jerking off scene too. Is when he's like so focused on.
That's just an image. It's not a GIF. But oh, Matt Frewer, you're so much better than Ezra Miller.
When I'm dead, just throw me in the trash.
Yeah.
My life for you. What does he have on, or they have on Hollywood?
Oh, and Daniel. Okay.
What? No, I'm not going to explore that. I'm sorry. Continue.
Now, there's lots of other cool characters, and not so cool characters.
The world building is fascinating,
and that is by far the best part.
Oh,
of the book.
100%.
Like I don't really care about the characters, but even like the woman who's having the affair, and the husband. I love
Bonnie
that.
When he like meets the guy with the gun, and he makes the guy like shit himself. My god,
I love those scenes.
That was so good.
I mean,
to me that's just revenge fantasy.
There's Larry Crockett. There's Mabel Wirtz. There's the bus driver who gets fucked by all the kids.
Oh my god,
oh, that's great.
I mean, we can honestly do one episode just talking about all the minor characters and all the vignettes.
Yeah.
If I had like made notes on them. In a way, I wish we would have done that instead of talking about Ben Mears and Susan North.
We got to ramble for a minute.
Yeah.
I'll kill you all. I'll drive you crazy and I'll kill you all. I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Scary shit. Is this book scary?
I think so.
Hef.
I'm terrified of it.
There were 2 scenes that gave me chills.
Well, first, yes, is it scary?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There are legitimate creepy parts of this book.
I thought it was terrifying the first time. I didn't think it was very scary the second time. At least in reference to the vampires, there were things about the people who did. But, okay. So let's start with Daniel. What's most scary to you in this book?
The scenes that get to me the most are like the hearing the vampire in the other room. That one's pretty effective. Seeing them just like scratching at the window. I prefer it, especially like in the miniseries where that's all done in like just silence with music. Like the vampires aren't talking. The idea of someone just like scratching at my window terrifies me. Like, if I wake up in the middle of I've had so many nightmares where I'm, like, walking through my house and there's just someone at my window. And that freaks me out. But even when they do talk, there is one scene that sort of gets to me, and it's just, like, the idea of what being a vampire actually is. And that's when Susan's a vampire, and she's just, like, basically begging because it's such agony to be that thirsty. And then you got the small town sort of horror of... you're fucking this hot broad, but then her husband shows up and puts a shotgun in your mouth.
You shit your pants.
Or a dude who got away with murder for so many years, and everyone just thinks his wife ran off with the dude. Like that shit sort of scares me because that's real, and then the other shit sort of scares me because it reminds me of nightmares I've been having for years.
My big thing was remember how I told you that I have a problem with like reading books and being scared of them? I have to basically isolate myself and like whatever, put myself like in a state where like nothing else is happening around me. I was able to do that with this book.
Hooray!
And there were a few scenes that chilled me. Like I said, the big one that chilled me a lot was the bus driver, where he's just locked in there and those kids just basically jump on him like he's a fruit pie.
Like, fuck them kids, man.
It's like 12 Bobby Hills and one walking, talking fruit pie.
Yeah.
But damn.
Yeah, that one was legitimately creepy. And them being under the trailers kind of weirded me out.
Oh, yeah.
Or like, cause it's just like these eyes just like looking at you.
Yeah, like the weird places they find to sleep.
Yeah, just like...
It's sort of weird because it makes you think of like all the nooks and crannies you don't think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the vampire baby.
Used to live in a trailer and had things under the trailer. Like, we had a possum staying under our trailer once. We had a skunk staying under our trailer once. And hearing them when you're walking around, or your cat's going nuts because they can smell it and hear it and running around.
I have 2 baby raccoons living in my attic right now.
Nice.
So, they make a lot of noise.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're very cute, though. I finally got to see them outside of my attic. Took some pictures, tried to give them food, and they wouldn't come near me.
We have a groundhog that lives under our shed.
Yeah.
And when I let the grass get too tall, it comes out to eat the grass. And it does it like right where the window in the kitchen is, so I can stand there and do dishes and watch it eat grass.
That's cute.
Yeah, and last time I took a video and I sent it to Beck, and she's like, "We need to nail up that hole so it can't live." And I'm like, "No, that's my friend."
That's Gerald.
But imagining like a person's head coming out of there terrifies me.
Yeah.
Vampire baby was a little bit. I was like, ew. I hadn't thought about that.
So the first time I read this book, I think, like Hef, I isolated myself. What was I playing? The first time I read this, I was super obsessed with Pokemon Legends Arceus, and I put like 250 hours in that game, and I was so I listened to like this whole book while I was playing that game, which means I was in my basement and I was at night and the lights were off and nobody else was around. So that's the kind of atmosphere I listened to this book in, and I think it was a lot scarier that first read than it was the second read, where I was mostly like listening to it while I was like driving or doing dishes or maybe when I was working, and that definitely affected it. But I also think it was less scary for me the second time just because I consider myself generally a pretty jaded person, but I think unfortunately this podcast has made me like even more so.
It's like when I criticize horror movies. It's like, because I watch so many of them, so it's harder to find a one that like is effective.
But
yeah,
I will still like never ever forget like how fucked up I got
the first time.
I heard like Mike Ryerson getting attacked by Danny Glick in Matt Berg's house.
Yeah,
that like scared me shitless. Like art to the point where I was like locking windows and like double checking them. And
I've heard birds scratching my window before, and it freaks me out years later. So,
but to this day, like the most effective thing for me was, I think it's the McDougalls, who are the people who live in the trailer and the woman who beats her baby.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's still
like the small town real shit is,
that made me sick. Like I was upset. And then when the baby dies and she puts him in his high chair and tries to feed him chocolate pudding,
and it just plops out.
I was like, that's the worst. That is so bad.
Yeah.
It's not like Gage getting run over in the road levels bad, but
it's still pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
It's still pretty effective, yeah.
Yeah.
It's blood curdling is what it is.
Yeah,
like, because that's not, it's not even just a fear thing. It's just like if you actually just put yourself in a situation where like you are actively seeing this, you know it happens, and you just watch it. It's just like because you're probably in a state where, how do you restrain yourself from just wanting to like, not even rage out, but like, just like, what the fuck are you doing?
And
like,
I had my first kid when I was 20, and at the time we lived in a mobile home, and I have never beat my children, but I have been at that point where you're just so mad you have to walk away. And obviously this woman didn't learn you have to walk away.
Sometimes you walk away from the situation.
Yeah, but sometimes you just put them in the crib and you just walk away and you just let them scream, because if not, you're gonna beat them.
Yeah.
But so it was very relatable to me, because I have also been a person who had children very young and lived in a mobile home they didn't really want to live in. But also, like, another big one was the guy who caught his wife cheating on him with the phone guy, but then later you find out that he's been beating her and raping her to like put her into a submission.
Yeah, to put her in a place.
Because like at the point where like he has the shotgun in the kid's mouth, you're like, oh, this guy's so like
at that point,
he's
you're
kind of the good guy. You're like, oh, okay, that's funny, and then you realize no, he's really actually he's the worst of the two. I mean, like, infidelity is not good, but it's way better than beating and raping your wife.
Yeah, you should have put the shotgun in her mouth.
He probably did.
I was gonna make that joke
simultaneously.
But yeah, and other than that, just it has like a very creepy aura to it. When Mike Ryerson is digging the grave for Danny Glick, when Danny shows up at Mark's window, when the movers bring the furniture down into the basement of the Marston house.
There's an ambiance in this book.
When Mike Ryerson finds the dog staked up on the fence.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's just lots of, like, really creepy moments.
The whole book is a sense of dread.
Yeah.
Like, another thing, I was going to say, like, as far as that, but I'll say it now. One of the other things I found kind of scary about this thing is that constant sense of dread is very much enforced in the storytelling of it, because as you're going through the book, all your characters are becoming increasingly more depraved, or they're falling into the darkness that the vampirism is actually driving. So it feels like you as the reader are constantly being slowly strangled by the actual feeling this book is trying to push, which is basically just, you feel like you're just drowning in the darkness, much along the same lines as our characters. Because as the book goes, less and less of your characters get to the end of the story, to the point that only 2 of them.
Yeah, and we never brought this up. I think it's a point in the book's favor, and I've been criticizing this book a lot, which is I love this book, but it's a big point in its favor that it kills a lot of them, and specifically the one that I think is Susan. Killing Susan is because you a lot of times, like, the Susan type character does not die.
Yeah.
And this is a death that serves the story very well, even though I don't think Ben has a big enough reaction to it. But I think Vampire Susan, even though she's, like, very underused, I think she is very creepy.
Yeah.
This book sells, I think, a lot. Like I said, the dread is a big thing, but what I think I like a lot the most about it is it really does put you as the reader in a state of, you really don't know if you're going to make it out of this book.
With the exception of Ben and Mark, who it tells you at the beginning of the book
Yeah.
to survive. But, yeah.
Yeah.
But you're still shocked when Jimmy dies, when he falls off the stairs and lands on a pile of knives. Yeah.
I was so mad.
I know. I was, the first time I read it, I was too. But I should have known that he doesn't, because it tells you at the beginning of the book that it's the man and the boy, not the man and the man and the boy.
Yeah. Oh, by that point, though, you're so engrossed in it, like, you just... Like, that's like what I liked about it a lot, is because, like, that whole beginning chapter, there's so many times where I forgot that was a thing.
And that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, so, like, I think the book sold me on that. Like, 'cause there's so many times I forgot.
Yeah, and it's like you should have known that something was going to happen to Susan.
Yeah.
Because she's not present in the frame narrative, but you forget about the frame narrative because you're concerned about what's going on in the book. Okay, more in scare shit. Daniel, can you talk to us a little bit about how the vampires in Salem's Lot compare to vampires in classic media, and how they compare to vampires in modern media?
Okay, in terms of classic, it's almost he just wanted to adapt classic vampires. He took, like, Dracula rules and went, okay, I'm going to superimpose this on small town New England.
Mm-hmm. The only, like, there are a couple things that, like, vampire Dracula rules that don't show up, and that's the crossing of water.
Yeah.
That doesn't come up. And it references that he likes all the predators of the night, but, like, them transforming, that never really comes up.
Yeah, but you got the stuff like Christian symbolism hurts them, turning into mist to get into places.
Yep.
Hypnotism. Even Dracula was sort of implied to be like the one in control of everything. Like, everything, Dracula was the main source and everything else is his thralls.
Yeah, it's not like a literal hive mind like the Borg.
Yeah,
but
they know who the master is.
Yeah, it's kind of like a semi hive mind state.
It's a understood hierarchy, like an instinctual hierarchy.
Yeah,
like
almost like a wolf pack.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
And that's what. So, in terms of adapting it, he took being invited in. You know, you have to unlock your window. You have to let me in. Mm-hmm. Now they're doing it through, like, via hypnotism too, so it feels like cheating.
Yep.
But at the same time, he's including those rules, and I think it adapts it pretty well. In terms of modern vampires, I don't even know how to start talking about modern vampires half the time.
It's very different
because this isn't a bad thing. It's just kind of a thing when it comes to writing in general, is everyone wants to do their spin of something. Mm-hmm. Well, but now we've had like 10,000 takes out. Here's my take on vampires. Here's how my vampires are different. Here's how my zombies are different. Here's how... So, I don't even know where to start with that. They're more romanticized these days. Even the bad ones are romanticized.
King will do that in other vampire stories, such as Dr. Sleep, the Library Policeman, mm-hmm. and his Vampires in the Dark Tower. They are less classical, and they are, like, here's my spin on vampire mythology. So he does do that too, but his first like crack at it
was
very traditional.
Here's the vampires I liked,
Yeah.
like what I like to read about in my setting.
And it's not strictly like Dracula vampires because it also has some influence from those like EC comics.
Yeah,
yeah,
but
and they're a little pulpier.
But it was, here's the thing that I liked
in my setting instead of here's my spin on the thing
Yeah.
in my setting.
Yeah.
So,
as opposed to something like Dowry of Blood, where it's like, okay, I'm going to take like the traditional Dracula, but and his wives, but I'm going to put my spin on it, which is they're in a polyamorous relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to kind of be the focus of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not pooping on like those modern vampire stories because a lot of those are good.
Yeah, it's why I tried to, preface it with this isn't a criticism. I just don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to do, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to do your spin on something. It's just
yeah, and especially something that's played out as vampires.
Yeah, there's so much of it that
you either have to do something new or it has to be so good that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Mr. Huff.
Oh, I don't have an opinion.
Okay. He doesn't play tribal vampires. He didn't try to. I'm goblins now.
Yeah. I don't know. Classic versus modern, I'm generally in the same alignment as you. Like, as far as modern vampire tales, I'm just disinterested most of the time. And then classic vampire tales, there aren't many to go back to.
Yeah.
Other than, like, one like this or Dracula. Like,
well, I mean, Carmel is really good. The Vampire by John Polidori
Still need to read that
is
one.
really good. The Family of the Vordelak, which I forget the author. The author is Russian, and his name is kind of hard to say.
Nabokov.
Yeah, no, it's not Nabokov. That one's also really good. And I've only read a little bit, but there's Varney the Vampire, but that's like super pulpy.
That sounds super.
it's hard not to be burned out by vampires, I think, at this point. Like, that's my biggest struggle. Like, anytime I hear anything about a vampire or anything, I'm just kind of like, ugh.
I mean, it's...
I would like to not be that close-minded about it, but I have to admit that I am.
Stoker! Phil Compton from True Blood.
How many freaking vampires am I supposed to care about these days?
I like vampires, but I really limit the amount of vampire media that I consume, and that helps. But like a bad piece of vampire media is just the worst. Like, I listened to the episode we did on Near Dark, where I generally try to be pretty positive, but I was very unapologetic about how I did not like that movie.
And there's so many people who seem to, and neither of us were like really big on it.
I listened to the Losers Club podcast on Salem's Lot, and they mentioned Near Dark in it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my god, that movie. I don't know. Maybe if I was alive I was alive in the 80s, but maybe if I was an adult and saw that movie in the 80s, I would feel different.
Kiss me, fat boy.
Kiss me, fat boy. How would you have Susan Norton kiss you like your mother never had?
Probably on the penis.
Okay, I was gonna say I was gonna have her eat my ass. With kisses.
Well, you guys took the two good ones.
No, we took the two easy ones.
So I'm gonna have her clean out
with her tongue.
Her tongue, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's gross.
She's gonna kiss and then she's gonna open her mouth and show it to me.
Oh, that's
and
gross.
then say thank you for the meal, Daddy.
Excuse me, I have to go and vomit.
Oh, vomit. That's so gross.
That is pretty gross.
Oh, of all the crap you've said, that's the one that's so gross.
That's all just gonna be a giant bleep now.
Oh, that is so gross. Yeah, I might just bleep all of that.
Yeah, pick specific, like, little things there. That's great.
Do you have any, like, commentary on, like, the actual sex in this book?
This is the most G-rated
Yeah,
Stephen
it's
King
not...
novel as far as sex in a book I've ever read.
It wasn't 7 kids in a sewer.
No, I mean, like, the sex scene with Ben and Susan at the park is actually kind of sweet.
Yeah.
And, like, we didn't really get to talk about it, but even though, like, they're their romantic subplot, there's nothing really remarkable about it. It is still kind of a cute story.
Yeah.
The thing that I really liked about it was that her dad likes him. It's just like, he just hits it off with his maybe future father-in-law, and it's like, wow, that's kind of
why
cool.
I related to it. Dads tend to like me, but mothers always seem to hate me, and I can't figure it out.
That wasn't awkward at all.
Shake it off. Ooh, ooh, shake it off.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Power of Christ compels you. So, a big theme specifically to Father Callahan is Big E evil versus Little E evil, being Big E evil being like the devil. The devil is the Christian idea of the source of all evil, and all evil comes from him, and like the old like human idea of we have to continually in our everyday lives fight against evil, being the devil and the spawn of the devil and the devil's machinations, and then Little E evil being just like the everyday shit that people do to each other. So it's
beating babies.
Essentially what this book is about. Big E evil being fucking vampires, and Little E evil being beating babies.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of room to comment on that. I just feel like we've talked about that sort of naturally as we've gone by.
Yeah. I like that Doc Brown, Father Callahan's story is that he is a Catholic priest who still believes in God, but he's struggling with his faith because he wants to be part of a greater battle against capital E
against
evil.
Actual evil.
Yeah.
And all he's ever confronted with is the horrible shit that people do,
Yeah,
and he has to forgive them for
small E evil. Literally, like, he has to confess these people,
Yeah.
and he can't say or do anything about it. If she comes back and tells me she beat that baby one more time.
Yeah, and it's like the idea that there might be something that's evil by its nature as opposed to something that's made evil through its choices.
Which, in a way, to me, it feels like you're wanting something more simple. Like, I want to oppose the devil because the devil is evil just because he's evil.
Yeah.
As opposed to a mom who's beating her baby, which is an evil act, but you understand that it's because she's in a situation she doesn't want to be in. She made a decision of passion and had sex unprotected, and now she's in this marriage that isn't ideal, and
And it's because Big E evil, he believes he knows how to confront.
Yeah.
He believes he knows what the solution is, and again, he pays for that.
Mm-hmm.
He pays for that. Hubris, is that the word I'm looking for?
Sorta. I mean, it's...
I don't know if it's hubris,
I don't even know if it's like pride. It's like he wanted like an easier... I don't want to say it's like it's easier to...
He thought it would be easier to confront a source of evil as opposed to like actual human problems.
Big Evil has an end goal. Little Evil doesn't.
And he comes across Big E evil and he falters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Little Evil is that's the world building of the book.
Yeah.
The little evil is what encapsulates all of the dread and darkness that's going on in the overall big evil scheme.
Stephen King is asking, is there something even worse?
Yeah.
And he sort of tries with vampires. I don't know if he succeeds in getting across the point that there might be something worse than Little Evil.
I think this is like the big evil versus little evil is actually probably the most poignant part of the book, because to me this is what makes the book a modern vampire tale. Because if he just went like Big E evil, kind of like Dracula did, I don't think his audience would have been as receptive.
No,
whereas,
I agree.
It would have just been Dracula at that point.
Right.
Yeah,
like
Dracula.
If you incorporate all these other
Mm-hmm.
little tangents and whatnot in the greater scheme of evil, then there's your world building. So I think that's what makes it a lot more encompassing.
I think it's very telling that once we got out of characters, our conversation has been mostly positive about that. But it's just if you just listen to the character section, you would think that we hate this fucking book. Do you think that this book confirms, like, Christian mythology to be fact within the Stephen King universe?
Surface level, yes, but then again, no one did try a Jewish star. Like, no one tried an alternative faith, like, symbol. And, like, even Barlow, like, comments on that when he's, like, mocking Father Callahan about shamans and their symbols.
I love when he calls Callahan a shaman.
Yeah.
I just fucking love it. I can't tell you why, but it's just, like, it gets me hard.
Yeah. It's my favorite part of the book.
Hello, shaman.
If you really have such faith, then toss your symbol aside.
Face me, mano a mano.
I think that's actually a really good point. Like, I don't know, like, the Christianity, it is on the nose.
Yeah.
But I also feel like there are points of this book, and that scene specifically is kind of the big one, is, you know, how much do you believe in your faith? I think this is much more of a message about, like, Barlow is basically saying, you don't believe in your God, so how could you beat something that you have no belief in? If you have no belief in the thing that kills me, how can you kill me? And I think that
with wood,
right? So, like, to me, it's much more like I think Stephen King's more trying to push the idea that if you're going to see something through, whether it be religion or even just life in general, you have to be committed to it, because otherwise you're going to come up against this roadblock, and unless you are sure of your own ability or your faith in the ability to do something about it, you're going to fail.
My answer to this question is no. Have you ever watched a movie at just, like, the absolute perfect time where you're having, like, an issue in your life, and then you watch a movie and then it just, like, everything makes sense?
Yeah.
That happened to me this week, and it was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. For two reasons. The first reason, which I'll table for later, we'll talk about maybe, like, in Kings and Koontz. But the other reason is like, I was thinking about, like, the Christian mythos in this book and just pretending like I've never read Dark Tower. And, like, does this prove that, you know, what Christians generally believe in is fact within the Stephen King universe? And after watching The Last Crusade, I say no. And that's because it is proven in both stories that supernatural things happen, but they could just be a pagan or general idea of light versus good. And, like, the key piece of evidence for me is that when Ben is about to kill Barlow, there's a description that he is filled with light, and it's not like a Christian sense of light, but it's like a natural elemental sense of light. And yes, like, crosses do burn vampires in this book, but maybe they don't because it's a representation of Jesus Christ, and maybe it does because people believe them to be a representation of light and good, and vampires are beings of darkness and evil.
Are you guys familiar with the idea of Plato and his cave and his sense of Platonic forms?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically it. It cross is a symbol. Light is the archetypical antithesis of darkness.
And it's as I was watching, like, all the Holy Grail shit at the end of Last Crusade, I was just like, does this mean that, like, God is real in the Indiana Jones lore? Not necessarily, because it could just be, like, an elemental sense of good that we structure into Christian mythology in order to understand it. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that it is exactly as Christians would explain it.
Yeah.
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 The power is in you.
Side tangent. So Emma went to see Dial of Destiny with me, and she didn't get past Temple of Doom because she just got triggered super hard by Billy, who's the blonde girl in Temple of Doom.
I could see that.
Yeah, that is not a character that translates well with modern women.
No.
So she has never seen Last Crusade or Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So, like, the whole time we're watching Die of Doom, she's like, how is he not dead? I'm like, he's immortal. He drank from the cup of Christ. He's immortal. Like, what? Like, he's literally immortal. I'm sorry.
If you would have watched the lore.
If you would have watched all the movies, you'd know this.
Sorry, you thought you could skip homework.
No.
Oh my god, are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
Kings and Koontz? Hef?
Okay.
King?
My king is... The world building is just grand. Like, the really thing that sold me on this book more than anything is the world building itself is based on the people around the main characters, so much to the point that I think that the world building is far more interesting than the characters it's trying to encompass.
I agree. The world building and the vignettes that support the world building, and also just like the early lot chapters that just explain the history and geography and economics of the town. That's my king.
My king is the shaman scene. Because it is the one that I remember the best. I think it encompasses everything that the book is trying to get across. And I imagine being super terrified of like a supernatural creature is like taunting me and like just saying that's not gonna protect you, and it's literally the only thing that's been working.
Your popsicle sticks.
Yeah.
I don't care if you have to glue 2 sticks together, Susan. Get across. And in the
my Koontz is actually Mark being too smart. Like, that bothered me way more than it should have.
Yeah.
A close second was when Jimmy died, and that's only because it made me so mad.
But Mark, it bothered me a lot. It's not my Koontz. So I really, really struggled the second time around because it just it didn't live up to my first time reading it. I just kept comparing it to other books like Dracula, which was a mistake. I also didn't seclude myself and read it in the dark like I did the first time. And I truly had like a crisis, like when Hank Hill shook George W.'s hand. I was like upset. I had a little crisis. And then I got a little help from Sean Connery by watching Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is like, you know, in my opinion, one of the greatest movies of all time. And I'm watching Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and I'm like, you know, there's a lot of internal inconsistencies in the plot in this movie, and there's a lot of things that don't make sense, but I don't really care, because as a whole, it just works for what it's trying to do. And as I was reading, and it made me like reflect on Salem's Lot, like, yes, the characters are kind of one-dimensional, and they could have been fleshed out more, but they work in the story to tell this modern day retelling of Dracula that's a little pulpier and takes place in modern America. And honestly, you don't really have to change anything. The story just works and is good as is. And thank you, Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, for just, you know, helping save Salem's Lot for me. My Koontz is... Although my Koontz is still, I think it should have been a little bit longer to flesh out those characters, but still.
That is also my Koontz. I think that it would have benefited from a little bit more characterization. I think even if it was just Ben, even if it was just
Ben or just Ben and Susan.
Yeah. Like one or two of them with like just a... God, it didn't even have to be a lot.
No.
I feel like the best arcs or the best like payoffs were given to side characters.
Yes.
And that's not exactly a bad thing, but you probably be your main characters that get that arc.
Probably.
It should be the main character that pays for his faltering of faith or his belief that he's too smart.
And shaman.
Yeah. So that's my Koontz.
No, I agree. Daniel, here's your... Oh, God, we have so many you can barely even fit it on a page now. All right, here's your rankings. Where do you put the old lot? I'm guessing it's not number 1, and I'm guessing it's not number 23.
It is definitely not those. God. Okay, I liked it more than Carmela. I think it's gonna be. This surprises me. I think I'm gonna put it right under Rango.
Your new number 11.
Yeah, I thought it was gonna be higher than that.
I'll tell you, before I started rereading it, I thought it was going to be my number 2.
Yeah.
And it's not my number 2.
It's your number 1. No.
It's not. All right, Hef.
It's my number 1.
All right.
It's his number 1.
I don't feel like I need to defend this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway.
You kind of do, because I still think it's dumb little brother.
I mean, I would agree with that. That being said, from my, I'm trying to make it a point where, like, what books did I enjoy more? Salem's Lot, as a rule, had a lot of things going for it in the sense that it was really my first horror novel that I really sank
your teeth into.
My teeth into, yes. Yeah.
I've been trying to avoid those puns all night.
It gave me legitimate creepy vibes. I think the world building and everything just kind of puts you in that saturated state of darkness that it is really trying to impress upon you.
Yeah.
And there's just some sections of it that I was just like, can we please be fucking done? And this, I didn't really have as much of a problem with that.
It's significantly shorter than it.
Yeah. Now, that being said, like, the character, like, it destroys it when it comes to, like, the characters and then the mythos behind it.
Yeah.
I will agree that it is the better novel.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as my enjoyment of the book, I enjoyed Salem's Lot more.
Okay, that's fair. It's my number 4. Now, if you would have asked me before we started this podcast to give you my top 5 Stephen King books, I probably would have said It, Salem's Lot, Pet Sematary, The Shining Dead Zone. So when I started rereading this, I really thought it was going to be my number 2, below it and above Pet Sematary. And again, our ranking, there's a link to the Google Drive that has our rankings in the show notes. Or if you're in our Discord, you can just go to the rankings channel and look at these. But as I finished it, I looked and, on paper, Salem's Lot should be the better book for me between it and Pet Sematary, because world building is like the biggest thing for me when it comes to books. It kind of tips into the fantasy genre, which is my favorite genre. And it also has an ensemble cast of heroes, and it's a good versus evil story, and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings are my 2 biggest things. So, like, on paper, I should like Salem's Lot more than Pet Sematary. Pet Sematary is a dark, dreary story about a child who dies, and it's a slow burn, and these are all things that I generally don't like. But Pet Sematary, to me, is it's the better book. And so I had to put it under Pet Sematary, and then I was looking at it at my number 3, Dracula, and I'm like, it's not a better book than Dracula, so it's my number 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I struggle with that. Yeah.
I toyed with if it was number 1 or number 2 for a while. Like, I had to boil it down to the overall, like, enjoyment, yeah.
That's fair. And then for Zombie Day, I just have a few quick things. Father Callahan, as I said earlier, and no spoilers, but, well, except for...
Oops.
Book 4 of the Dark Tower.
We will see him again. We will be talking about Father Callahan again on this podcast. Those of you who have read the Dark Tower series know. And then also, he thrusts his fists against the post and still insists he sees the ghost.
It's a great saying.
Yeah.
Spooky.
Yeah. And it shows up in it and in this book. So.
His name is also Ben.
Oh, that's Bill.
Yeah, but isn't there also a Ben?
In it?
Yeah, but in this, it's said by Mark.
Yeah.
And in it's said by Bill.
I'm just saying the name.
There are also
Bens.
There are also Bens. There's probably... If you thought about it, there's probably also another character that
there's only so many names. Steve, this book is filled with characters.
Yeah. Homework. what are your top 3 vignettes from Salem's Lot?
My number 3 is the definitely like just the pissed off bus driver. Like, he just spends so much of the book just being pissed off by kids, and then like he only gets his just desserts at the end by being locked up in a bus and eaten by them.
Yep.
Okay.
Like that's full circle.
It's good.
That's full circle. That's funny and creepy.
You guys will hate my number 3.
Okay. Are we doing like just all at once?
Or
I was gonna circle. So
okay, all right.
You go ahead.
Number 3 is the pudding with the baby.
Oh.
Yeah.
I hate you.
Yeah.
You also still give me shit about Sayori. By the way, I still hate you.
My number 3 was also the bus driver. So just real quick, I'm going to change mine to the old lady at the end of the book who lives on the outskirts of Salem's Lot. And there's a newspaper article about how she's watching TV one night and she looks over and there's somebody watching her from her window. That was very creepy. Daniel, you're number 2.
Alrighty. My number 2 is the hearing the sucking from the other room. It's just that entire sequence. Yeah.
Have your number 2.
Yeah. My number 2 is, I don't know if it's a vignette, but like I made an exception for it because it's the very end of the book where Ben and Mark go back to Salem's Lot and just burn it down.
Burn it down.
Like,
pretty good one.
Like what a holy fuck of an ending. Like, so I mean, I know it's not really a vignette, but that's I still think it's one of the high points.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. For me, it's just sort of the subplot in general. But if I have to pick one, the turning of Eva Miller by Weasel Craig, when he comes to her in her bed as a vampire and sucks on her neck and turns her into a vampire. I just absolutely love that scene.
That's my number 1.
It's really good.
Yeah, that broke my heart.
Yeah.
My number 1 is the grave digger and the whole son.
That was in contention for my number 3.
Yeah, that was also.
He swears he fills the eyes on him
Yeah.
and opens the coffin. That entire sequence.
My number 1 is
Now I can
actually
delete these.
My number 1 is actually the people in the trailer, and when she beats her baby and when she finds him dead and tries to feed him the pudding. Not because I enjoyed it, but it is the most effective.
It's a very evocative scene.
Oh god, yeah, it works.
Yeah.
It knows what it's doing.
Okay, question for the listeners. Do you like old school Dracula's Lot?
Dracula's?
Do you like Dracula or do you like Salem's Lot? Which do you think is the better book and why? Reach out to us on our socials.
Dracula's Lot, otherwise
Dracula's
known as,
Lot.
otherwise known as
We
the
should
Demeter.
open a poll.
Yeah, well, you can do that. And then for further reading, obviously, I think if you like this book and you haven't read Dracula or I Am Legend, those are both priorities to read. But also It, for me, as I've said, is just kind of the superior version of the story. But if you like the epistolary structure, Stephen King's first novel, Carrie, actually carries that structure much better. And also the Dark Tower series, because not only does it I didn't mention this in background, but Stephen King intended to write a sequel to Salem's Lot and decided against writing a sequel and just used some of what he wanted to do as a sequel in the Dark Tower series. So in a way, the Dark Tower is kind of a sequel to Salem's Lot, and we've already mentioned that Father Callahan appears in the Dark Tower, so that I would also, if you really like Salem's Lot, I would also make the Dark Tower a priority. Other suggestions for further reading?
Not really. Mainly just because I'm reiterating what you told me whenever I first started getting into this stuff, and that's just that Salem's Lot really is just one of the best entry points you can make into a genre like this if you've never experienced it before.
Yeah, and I still, even though I didn't like it nearly as much the second time I read it, I still think it's probably...
It's the best gateway.
One of the best, one of the best, if not the best, of his novels to read to start out with. And The other one that I would probably throw is Carrie, actually, for a specific audience, because it's so extremely relatable for such a large number of people. But unless you have like specific like horror kinks, like if you're really like into animal attack shit, then maybe you would want to start with Cujo. Or if you're a gearhead, I would really say start with Christine. Like, there's a lot of reasons I would recommend other books, but in general, Salem's Lot is probably where I would point you.
Yeah. I mean, it does a good job of, like, not overexposing you to Kingisms, like, at first, because everything's, like, kind of, if it's your first one, you're not used to it.
Yeah.
So, like, there's not all these, like, it's not excessive. So I think it's a good entry point. And then, because that's what happened to me, like, once I started reading more, I started seeing all these, you know, extra stuff that he does that just kind of pulls from his main, almost trope source of himself. And I think this is an excellent kind of gateway into it.
I don't specifically remember him making fun of fat people in this book.
I swear that...
He probably does, and I just don't remember.
Yeah.
Daniel, anything to throw out there? Vampire guy?
Let the Right One In. Fantastic.
Is that a sequel to Let the Right One In?
God damn it. There should be other ones that would be... a lot of the vampire books I like, I don't know if you like Salem's Lot.
I have not read Neuroscope and Interview with a Vampire, but they do, from what I know of them, they seem to be very different.
Necroscope you'd probably like...
Necroscope, yeah.
Would like a little bit more. You wouldn't like Interview with the Vampire. I mean, you might like Interview with the Vampire, but not for the same reasons. I'd probably... because Necroscope also does try to be a little bit scary and semi-apocalyptic with vampires.
If Suki Stackhouse didn't rub your clit. I'm sorry, that was rude.
How do you know about my clit?
I just got... No, I'm sorry.
Upcoming on the Horror of Babylon next week, we are going to be reviewing the 2 short stories that go along with Salem's Lot. They are Jerusalem's Lot and One More for the Road, both from the Night Shift story collection. And then the following Sunday, July 23rd, we will be reviewing the first TV adaptation, which is Toby Hooper's Salem's Lot from 1979, which is actually maybe even better known in the general horror community than this book is. Generally, when I see people talking about Salem's Lot on the interwebs, they're talking about this TV miniseries as opposed to this actual book.
Yeah.
And then our next 2 bonus episodes on July 13th, we are returning to Treehouse of Horror of Babylon for Dial Z for Zombies, which is the Simpsons zombie mashup. And then the following Thursday, July 20th, we are going to speak with our good friends Natalie Portman and Jean Reno and watch Leon the Professional from 1994.
Daniel's new favorite movie.
We'll see.
Maybe.
We'll see. I think it's Natalie Portman's like 8th best movie.
I think what we're going to get is 100% take on Daniel. It's either going to be, I fucking hate you people, or
this is the greatest
thing I've
ever seen. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. All right, thank you to our patrons, Abigail, the First Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, and
Logan,
the Full Metal Patron. And thank you to Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit at the Morgantown Mall in Morgantown, West Virginia, or the Mall at Robinson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And you can go into the park in Morgantown and you can see little Ronnie Norton there reading Daniel's book, Legacy. And Ronnie looks at Daniel and says, I'm reading your book, Legacy. This is your picture. And it leads to this very, like, cute but short romantic thing where Ron is eventually murdered by, I don't know, let's say cannibals.
That's hot. It's hot because apparently I'm published.
Oh, it's self-published.
Doesn't matter.
And it's self-published on
Amazon.
On Wattpad. And he actually, he printed them all off and then printed your Facebook picture and slapped it on the back.
That's even better. I have a stalker.
But it turns south very quickly whenever he corrects one of your spelling errors.
That doesn't bother me.
You ended the sentence in a preposition.
I end sentences in prepositions all the time. It's like a little extra spice.
Oh, it would have been so funny. It's so much funnier if you ended that sentence on a preposition. Okay. Thank you both for rereading Salem's Lot and recording with me tonight.
Most definitely.
Yep. And thank you for listening. Stay tuned for our socials and stay scary.
Stay scary.
Stay scary, folks.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher, and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/The Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and all other major podcast apps. Stay scary.